Bonjour, hello, and welcome to the Fashioning Resurgence panel series co-presented by Indigenous Fashion Week Toronto and the School of Fashion at Ryerson University. My name is Riley Kucherin, and I'm an assistant professor of design leadership at the School of Fashion. Today, we're sitting down for colors, materials, and symbols, the visual language of fashion. Thank you so much for joining us. Chimigwech, to our lovely participants, for inviting us into your homes, it looks like. We're coming at you from all over Turtle Island. I'm so excited to hear your perspectives. And I want to jump right into introductions. And I'm going to ask, who are you? Where are you from? And what do you do? What's the work that you're going to be talking about today? Karen, you're on the left side of my Zoom screen, so why don't you begin?
Okay, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be with all of you. I want to thank Riley for the invitation, and Sage and Indigenous Fashion Week Toronto. My name's Karen Kramer. I am coming at you from Marblehead, Massachusetts, just north of Boston, and I work as a curator at the Peabody Essex Museum, and I curated the Native Fashion Now traveling exhibition a few years ago, and I'm more recently back in school as a graduate student in a doctoral program at Harvard studying American Studies. So I'm really interested in the intersection of art and cultural expression and Native art as resistance.
Amazing. Miigwech. Barbara, how about you?
Hi, that's Ashe Barbara Taylor Ornelas in Shia. Kabahin Snow Toy Headlini Basashin. Had no Nidashan, Ashit Nidashache. Eat us, son and Hi, I'm Barbara Taylor Ornelas. I'm of the Edgewater clan, born for water that flows together. My grandfather's clans are One Who Walks Around and Red Bottoms clan. And this is who I am. I've been a weaver for over 45 years. I've worked with different museums. I've traveled the world teaching about Navajo weaving and the history, and I've authored a couple of books with my sister on Navajo weaving.
Miigwech.
Thank you.
Mila?
Hi, my name is Mila Nakeko. I'm Dacho Dene Suthlene. I am originally from Flitliquet in the Northwest Territories, and I currently live in Yellowknife. I am a land-based Indigenous arts educator. I teach moose hide tanning, and I work with an organization that I helped found, Dene Nawo, and I'm also an artist and an actor.
Awesome. And Natalie?
Hello, I'm Natalie Atkinson. I'm a journalist and culture columnist. I write for the Globe and Mail and Zoomer, and I'm coming to you from here in Ontario.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining, everyone. I think the first thing I want to talk about is Native Fashion Now. Karen, it was instrumental to my falling in love with Indigenous fashion. I think it was one of the first times that I saw Indigenous fashion standing on its own and without, references to, any of that history. It was just such a beautiful moment to see it, up in front and center. Like, it was our own. It was Indigenous fashion, and it's important. And it was so pivotal to my journey towards Indigenous fashion. So, do you want to speak about the process of curating that exhibition?
Sure. Thank you for saying that. It's really gratifying to hear. And it was such a joy to put that show together. The exhibition really came about because I had been, as a curator, I sometimes do studio visits, but I often, part of my practice is to go to Santa Fe every summer to Indian Market. And I just kept noticing this proliferation of Indigenous fashion, all the way from streetwear and t-shirts and everyday kinds of jewelry and accessories, all the way up to haute couture. And so kind of building on the fashion program at the Peabody Essex Museum, I thought, let's do something with this moment that we're in. We're in the middle of this incredible moment. So the exhibition wound up having about 100 works of everything from the 1950s forward, and lots of ensembles, streetwear, really, really fancy, one of a kind, avant-garde clothing and accessories. And the exhibition featured about 71 Indigenous designers from what is now the United States and Canada. And that meant working with nearly 70 living Indigenous artists, which was an incredible experience. And it really shaped the vibe of the show. It shaped how people understood the exhibition and how they experienced it, I think.
For sure. And so today, I think we're also talking about materiality and how the materials convey meaning. And so I think I want to hear about, I want to jump to Barbara and Mila to ask about, what is the significance of Indigenous materials? And then how do you articulate that in something like an exhibition where, you have to work with the weavers for so long to come to truly understand, I think, what weaving is about, or you have to actually be hide tanning to come to learn to what it's about. But so Mila, what is it like tanning a hide? What is that process like?
It's very hard work. It's physically very hard. It's also very hard, mentally. There's a lot of protocols that go into tanning hides because it is one of our land-based practices that help us pass down a lot of teachings spiritually, also our relationship with the animals, the land, our relationship within our communities with harvesters and hide tanners. And so from my experience, it's very community-based work that I've done it by myself, but then with the work that I do, I work with communities to do a community hide camp. And it really brings out the best in everybody because through the process, we have to be holding positive thoughts so that all of that good energy goes into the hides that we produce. And so yeah, there's a lot of different teachings that come with hide tanning. I think with all land-based practices in our Indigenous communities, there's a lot of protocols and rules and stuff that we need to follow. And I think that's why it's really important to work with communities and have our elders present to be able to remind us of why we do things a certain way.
For sure. I think that's what sets Indigenous fashion or design apart, is that it's not just the aesthetics. It's not just the look of it. There's so much more meaning behind it. Barbara, are you seeing parallels between weaving and hide tanning?
Yes, I do. For us, the Let people, we shear the sheep and we clean the wool and we card and we spin. And everything that we do from shearing the sheep down to making your materials has a prayer that goes with it, and it has songs that go with it, and then all these prayers and songs are passed down generation from family to family. From my prayers and my song come from my mom's side of the family, so that my children know those songs and they know those prayers. And if they ever work with wool, that's what they do. And even in the weaving part, when you're weaving back and forth, there's songs that go with it. There's songs and prayers that go with warping the loom. There's songs that you sing and you pray and to start the weaving, and when your pattern starts, and when you finish, there's weaving songs for finishing. And then there's another song that you sing when you're taking you're weaving off the loom. And so everything has a spiritual meaning behind it and stuff. We learned our stories and stuff from our grandmothers and our moms. It's just passed down generation. And I learned the stories of Spider Woman from my mother's side. And she, told me, she used to tell me every night when I was small about the story of Spider Woman, how she was our deity who taught the Navajo weavers how to weave. She learned how to weave from the spiders, and she saw the spider, and she saw the spider weaving a web, and she decided that, see if she could, do the same thing. And she picked materials to figure out how to do it. And the weaving gods saw her doing that, and they gave her permission to go to the 4 sacred mountains to collect materials from each mountain to create the Navajo weaving. You know, like from the first mountain, Blanca Peak, and she got wood and stuff to make the looms. And then from Mount Taylor, she got the plants and the, you know, the stuff that makes colors for the material. The third mountain, the Doko Osli, which is San Francisco Peak. From there, she got the designs that because that's where the thunder gods live, and she went there and she got the designs from them. They gave her permission, and they told her she doesn't out and out own these designs, that every time she used them, she has to bring them back, because there are going to be other weavers in line for those designs. That's why Navajo weaving doesn't have a lot of copyrights, because those designs don't belong to us, they belong to the thunder gods. And so, and then from the last mountain, she got her prayers and her songs from the last mountain, which is Big Sheep, Mount Hesperus in Durango. And so, you know, from each mountain, she collected all these materials, and the weaving gods came to her and told her to go ahead and put everything together. And that's how we end up, you know, getting a loom, which is basically something like this, you know. So the bottom beam here represents the earth beam. The top beam up here represents the sky beam. The right and the left represents the day and the night. And then the strings that you see here, the warp strings, are rain. Okay, so you have two sets of warps. You have the top one and the bottom. The top one is the male warp, and then the bottom one is the female warp. So this represents male and female rain. Okay, so then the patterns that you see here, this represents your life, the life that you live, the patterns that are in your life, and the colors that you choose. And that's all personal here. This part here in the middle of the weaving is called, you know, when there's like a fog, when there's fog storms and stuff, well, this represents the fog part. Okay, so when you have dots, when you don't have patterns in your head, when you're having problems, whatever, this is where you go to get your patterns back to you. And it reinforces your brain and your mind to come up with these patterns. And then these are all patterns from the thunder gods. And then once I'm done with this pattern, once I take this off the loom, these patterns go back to the thunder gods, so that my son or my daughter, my granddaughter, whoever wants to use those patterns are there for them. So, and this is what I learned as a child. And, you know, when the Navajos first started weaving, they did it for clothing. They did it for blankets and stuff. And later on, you know, when the trading post happened, then they realized that they could make money at it and sell them and stuff. But Navajo weaving was always part of our utilitarian use, you know, for clothing and even like for shoes and whatever. So it was always part of our fashion. It was that. It wasn't until the Navajos got rounded up and moved to Bosco Redondo in Fort Sumner, New Mexico, as prisoners of war in 1864 to 1868 that they saw the Spanish women there wearing calico skirts and velveteen tops. And so that's when the Navajos switched from wearing woven dresses to calico skirts and velveteen tops. So, you know, and a lot of our weaving has a lot to do with our fashion and how we adapt to our what's happening in our lives at that point.
Chimigwech, Barbara, there is a world, there's whole universes within this weaving, and there's so much, you know, spirit in it and intention in it. Mila, I saw you nodding your head. Any first reactions to what Barbara has been telling us?
Oh, well, I mean, Barbara, I want to have a very long conversation about copyright with you, because copyright, I mean, that's something I think about all the time. I mean, you said it, right? Utilitarian versus decorative. And these are these hierarchies that, of course, that are, you know, the mainstream has created to sort of be able to have like legal recourse, but it doesn't really talk about the moral or ethical recourse. And like, that's a topic I think about a lot. So, I mean, when you're talking about, I don't want to say motif, because in thinking about this panel a lot, where my work has traveled from is that I, was a fashion critic for a long time, and increasingly just didn't feel comfortable operating within the system as was required of me for fashion and capitalism. And so I think a lot more now about the intersection of culture and commerce and the challenges of those intersections. But, when thinking about this panel, what I thought a lot about was the visual culture and why appropriation and misinterpretation is happening so much with Indigenous culture, and what the systems are that set that up, and what world we live in that set that up. So when you're talking about, things that are part of your, identity and expression, what I think about is the visual culture and the sort of level of visual fluency that the mainstream world has now, and how we live in sort of a remix culture where things have become so detached from their original owners or meanings. And so that plays into the copyright, that you're talking about, or, the ownership that you're talking about. And that's just one thing that kind of came to mind, because I think that the fluency is good. I mean, it's an opportunity to continue to educate people who are already educated in things like interpreting, what a politician wears and what sort of signals they're sending, with their cuffs rolled up, something as simple as that we've kind of become so much more savvy and sophisticated about, but there's a whole area that has been left out of meaning. I don't know if that made sense, but that's sort of what I really think about a lot now, and like I'm paying attention to in all corners, or trying to. So.
For sure. And Karen and Mila, any impressions or first thoughts about this wonderful process that Barbara has described?
I was just thinking about how intact the knowledge is for in your community, for it to be passed down from your grandmother with all of the songs. And some of the work that I do when I go to communities, because of residential school and colonization, there's like a generational gap of knowledge in the high tanners in the area. And so a lot of the knowledge that is like, I'm bringing my Dene knowledge from the north into like Anishinaabe communities or Mi'kmaq communities, and filling in the gaps where they're missing. And so I think that's just so incredibly beautiful that the songs are still intact, and that you're still singing songs that your great-great-grandmothers used for weaving. And so I think that's beautiful.
Thank you. I think also, my family's kind of unique in that way. And I mean, we're really strong in our Navajo weaving culture, heritage-wise. But there are other Navajo families that are not, and I've been teaching Navajo weaving for like 22 years now. And I've had a lot of Navajo students that come to tell me that their weaving line is broken in their family. Their great-grandmother used to be a weaver, and then their mother didn't learn how. And then, so I feel like it's my job to teach them. But the thing, I teach them everything about the culture and about the song. I don't teach them the songs, but I teach them the history and how to start, how to finish, how to card, how to spin, and all that. But the one thing I don't share is my songs and my story and my prayers, because those belong to my family. And I tell them that you can come up with your own, or you can research your family and find out if there's somebody from that missing place knows those songs, So I feel like I'm doing my job in teaching a lot of Navajo students how to do weaving now. And we're at the point where I have like 4 students that are becoming teachers. And then I have 2 that are really starting to make a living at it. And one of the teachers just got a job with the Herd Museum as a curator for Navajo weaving. So I'm really, really proud of that. And she's came from a family that was her weaving family was completely broken. And I asked her what her goals was when I first started teaching her, and she said she wanted to become a good weaver, where she can go to art shows and sell her pieces, and she wanted to work in a museum, and she basically did everything she wanted to do. So yeah,
I think that's a really important point for our audience to know. Contextual pieces that not every Indigenous person is an expert on their own culture. And, a lot of us are piecing together, our processes, our histories, and leaning on other nations as well to do that. Like Mila, I know you've traveled, and met with so many different people to do this work. So I think Chimigwets, it's so beautiful that you can, then be inspiring the next generation of teachers, even Barbara, and supporting that next generation. Karen, did you want to jump in? Were you thinking about anything here?
Sure. I mean, I was really struck by that intergenerational aspect, but I was also thinking about what stays within your community and what is consumed by the external public, and how that knowledge that you have is still embedded and embodied in your textiles, but how some of that is not for everybody to know about. And I think that's really an important aspect. And I was also thinking about this sort of like teacher, mentor, mentee, and how whether it's intergenerational or not, how that is so imperative that those relationships are nurtured, and that and that you're doing that so actively, and that curator at the Heard Museum is now so well positioned to teach and learn from not only artists and weavers and designers who come through the museum, but from the textiles themselves. So I think that's just so exciting.
Did you experience that in your process of curating, having to kind of make decisions about, okay, what is put on the textual display next to the garments and what stays? Like, how is that negotiation of what gets articulated in the exhibit and what stays with the designers?
A very good question, and I think I can answer that a couple of different ways. So the first is that in building relationships with the designers, I think that there is a level of trust that needs to be established, and then as a curator, you sort of have to have an instinct, or it's best if you do, to sort of have a sense of what is appropriate to share, but also it's okay that I don't know everything. Like, I don't need to. And so I think kind of trying to strike that balance between what people are comfortable sharing, what has been written previously by scholars or in the past, and what the public needs to know also. So it's kind of this trying to strike this balance. And with many of the designers in the exhibition, there was so much generosity. And of course, you can't use all of the material that is shared about, or the ideas that sort of inspire people to create, or background information. You kind of have to really, you have 75 words or something in a label. And so you kind of have to create these opportunities, and, opportunities to share. But you also have to pick and choose what it is that makes sense over the arc of the exhibition. So I don't know if that answers the question exactly, but hopefully.
I love that idea of relationships, of having trusting relationships with the designers you work with, and centering those healthy relationships as the guide for your curation. Mila, have you experienced kind of similar tensions with what do you share, what do you not share in communities? I'm wondering if you've experienced kind of similar questions.
One of the things that I'm working with now is because of COVID, like, I've had all my camps canceled. And so there's a lot of learning over social media and like the internet. And it's really difficult for me because I'm supposed to teach in person, person to person. So there's some things that I can share like online or social media, but there's some things that have to be passed down in person. And so there's like a lot of knowledge sharing that's happening on YouTube and stuff through with high tanning, that there's like a disconnect from where that knowledge comes from. And so that's part of the protocols, and that's part of the things that is important about these types of teachings, is that there is a way to learn how to do them, and that's from a teacher in person, and also with community and elders around, so that like we're able to hear our what our rules and stuff are around these types of things. And so when I do go to communities, in some communities that where the knowledge gap is quite longer than others, I rely a lot on memories from the elders that are at the camp. So there's elders that were like, when I was a little girl, I remember my grandmother doing it this way. And so I will try to set up the certain parts of the camp in the way that they remember things. And I have had a couple of older participants, like in their 60s, that had just finished their first caribou hides and stuff like that. And so she was in a tent smoking her hide, and her 4-year-old grandson was in the tent with her. And she was like, I was that old the last time I saw something like this done. So it was really like those types of healing those intergenerational gaps is just part of the things that really like are the special parts of the work that I do. So yeah, when I'm in camp, I share as much as I can.
Right, but I'm hearing that there's also this kind of concern, at least for what does get shared publicly via YouTube, especially in during this pandemic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I have a question, I guess, for Barbara, because as we were sort of warming up, you're author of one book, but you have a second book that is specifically about technique, and I'm curious what is not shared there, and who is that book for? Because the danger. I mean, it's lovely to see and experience all this work, but we live in a world that tries to replicate and commodify anything that's visual. And so I'm curious about who that book is appropriate for and who you're comfortable adopting those teachings.
Like I said, my sister and I have been teaching for 22 years, and we've taught everybody. I mean, we've had students come from Japan, from Israel, from Australia, New Zealand, all over the place just to take our weaving classes. And we usually end up teaching 17 classes per year. And we go from the East Coast to the West Coast and a few other places. And we always, before we even start the class, we tell them that we're going to teach you the basics of weaving, only for you to appreciate Navajo weaving, because a lot of people don't understand what goes into the weaving. They just see the price tag on it. And they're like, I could get that in Mexico for $10, But the thing is, I'm sure you could, but our weavings come with a spirit. They have a life, they have a living thing in them, to where when you bring them into your home, it gives them a blessing and stuff. And so we tell people who are not Navajo, who are not Indigenous people, that we welcome to teach you whatever you want to learn, but we can't teach you the spirits, the songs, and then the prayers. We can't give you that, and you cannot sell your pieces as Navajo weaving, because you're not Navajo, and we have to battle a lot of companies that take our designs and techniques and stuff. And this is one of the reasons why I don't put my weavings online. I don't have a website to where I put all my weavings up that are for sale or whatever. I don't do that anymore, because I've had to battle all these Navajo inspired weavings from different countries and stuff. And I've tried hiring lawyers to get them to stop and things. And their thing is, it's not exactly the same as yours. They use a different color. They use a bigger size. They use, there was always something that they skirted around. So that's one of the reasons why I don't put any of my weavings online. And then, every time we teach a class, we tell them that they're not allowed to teach Navajo weaving because they're not Navajo. The only teachers we teach to learn to teach weaving is Navajos, because we feel like that's their birthright. That's where they come from. And but we make it a point to tell them that. And then we did the how-to book because 22 years, my sister and I used to give out these little pamphlets and stuff. And then everybody would say, you should just write a book. You should just write a book, And so we, when we first started, we started out with just one page, and then the last couple of years, we've had like 25 pages just to, that for the how-to thing. And so we turned that into a book. And it's mainly for our students, and it's mainly for the Navajo weavers that want to learn, but they don't have the opportunity to learn anywhere else, because a lot of the weaving books, the Navajo weaving books are written by non-Navajo weavers, and they got their information third hand. They found a weaver, and then they have a translator translating whatever the weaver is saying. So there's some lost communication there. And then, the writer puts their own spin on whatever this piece is being said. And a lot of those weavers a lot of the writers are floor loomers. So they kind of put a lot of their floor loom knowledge onto the Navajo weaving. So it's all mixed up and all jumbled up. And so it's, I've had students come to our classes and they say, I followed this book and I still don't get it. I still don't understand it. And the very first woman who did the Navajo weaving book, she went to a male weaver who wove the male way and was also left-handed. And there's just no way you could understand what she was writing, because it just didn't make sense at all. And so that was one of the reasons why. And then also because we wanted to set the record straight for Navajo weaving. We wanted to say, this is how we do it. This is how it's done, and not all these other books that came along, because the first person that wrote that book got rehashed over and over and over to different weaving books, and so I guess it was just our way of saying, this is how we do it. And and so far the reviews have been really, really good. And, a lot of our students are like, they're totally understanding, what they're doing. Cause I put a lot of troubleshooting in there. A lot of the Navajo weaving books don't have that, how to fix warp strings, how to fix this and that. And so it's more of a true Navajo weaver how-to book.
I think there's so many important points in there, Barbara. The idea that for so long, all of the literature written about Indigenous fashion was written by non-Indigenous people. It was anthropologists with their clipboards coming to study us, and there was so much mistranslation, miscommunication in that process. You touched on like the legal aspects of this. The law is not on our side for Indigenous design. We spoke about that in 2018. Anjali Patel was talking about how copyright just doesn't map onto Indigenous design. It isn't very helpful. And I love this, your answer was that you're learning the how-to appreciate it. You're not learning it to then go and open a business. You're learning it to appreciate it because you can't maybe appreciate it just visually. You need to know what goes into it. And it maps perfectly to hide tanning. I teach about hide tanning. I don't teach hide tanning, but I teach about hide tanning to give students an appreciation of leather and the price of leather and the hard work that goes into creating a pair of moccasins that you can't buy for $29.99 at the mall. But any thoughts on any of those? If not, I think I want
Me
to,
or are you talking to me? I'm sorry.
I was thinking Karen, Mila, or Natalie, if
Oh.
you had any thoughts to jump off of what Barbara just said.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, the sort of the appropriation, I mean, it's something that I'm always trying to understand what conditions have set it up that happens, that settlers feel that that's okay. Like, I'm trying to understand it so that you can understand what attitude needs to change and what knowledge needs to change so that to prevent it from continuing to happen. And part of it, I was trying to think of, the ways in which there's so many things that we call motifs now that have become part of the vernacular. Like it's not a parallel by any means, but it's just the idea that, say the Celt clans and plaids and tartans have been assimilated into the vernacular of textiles. And so the European impulse is to do that with everything, and to assimilate and own. And so when Barbara's talking, I'm thinking of that and unpacking, the misunderstandings around the community and the meaning and the process and because we call it technique, but it's not technique. It's a cultural value that's imbuing an aesthetic code. And I think that that's the fundamental knowledge disconnect, I guess, in talking about Indigenous fashion expression. And I even hesitate because I don't love the word fashion, because it disconnects us from the fact that it's a garment industry or a clothing industry, like on the large mass level, and it's an exploitative industry, and so it's more like it's art. So it's I think a lot about the language around it, and Barbara really triggers me thinking about that even more.
Karen or Mila? I see ideas forming, Mila.
Yeah, so teaching settlers or teaching non-Indigenous people, I would rather not have non-Indigenous people at my camps, especially down south. I think that there's a lot of non-Indigenous people teaching hide tanning, and so that's just purely technique. That has nothing to do with, has no cultural value. And so it's just, you're just learning how to do the process, so like when you're learning from like a hide tanner, and like I have my elders' knowledge, so I have to teach the way that I was taught by my elders. But also, like I didn't learn traditionally because everybody in my family went to residential school. And so all of my aunties and my parents and stuff didn't learn the process. So it took me many years to piece together the knowledge for myself. So I traveled to many communities in the North to get the knowledge that I have. And it's very difficult. It's not easy to revitalize knowledge like in processes in your family. But it's also just kind of like, it shouldn't be this hard for us to know, to get knowledge from our culture and stuff like that. And so I think that's part of the reason why I do travel to communities and structure the camps that I do teach the way that I do. So it's really community involved. And but yeah, I don't really teach non-Indigenous people.
I think I feel the same way about teaching, like my own people. I go 110% in teaching them everything, and I share with them everything, all my experience, everything I was taught, and with them, and I freely do that. But with non-Indigenous people, I hold them back. I teach them the basics, I teach them the techniques and stuff. A lot of the non-Indigenous people who take my class are floor loomers, and they'll use whatever techniques I taught them to work with their floor loom weaving things. But I think you feel more free, and you feel more spiritually. You feel satisfied when you teach your own people, and you feel like you've shared what they need to know, and stuff. And it makes them feel better because they're learning about their own people, you know, and it gives them the courage and the knowledge to do some research on their own family. You know, just like one of my students went back 3 generations to find her grandmother's aunt who was, you know, still alive, and she was able to learn the songs and the prayers from them. And she said, if you didn't bring that up, I never would have thought to go look for her and ask her those questions. And I said, you know, because a lot of the elders, we're losing a lot of our elders, and with them goes the knowledge of our songs and our prayers. I would seek them out to find out, you know, what they know and learn what they have. So I agree with you. I would rather have a whole classroom full of Navajo students, you know, because then I'm able to freely share what I know.
Yeah. That makes total sense to me. I think the fact that you're even willing to teach non-Indigenous people is really quite generous. I was thinking, I guess, about something that Natalie was raising about appropriation, and I was thinking about these uneven power dynamics that happen with mainstream fashion design and Indigenous makers, and how beautifully sustaining your knowledge is within your community, as you're talking, Barbara, and Mila too. And this like feedback system that sort of sustains, versus this capitalist like vulture that comes in, mainstream designers, and might take without permission designs from Dene communities and artists and families, and pluck these designs out of context, feed them to the public with very little connection and very little understanding of the meanings, and how that money doesn't make its way back to the community. And there's so many things we can talk about in terms of appropriation, and how this form of cultural borrowing is actually not sharing or appreciation, because of this sort of larger system at play and these uneven power dynamics. So I was thinking about that, I think, through Natalie's question and through your sharing, Mila and Barbara.
I'm not saying that, you know, I don't like to teach non-Indigenous people. I do. I have a lot of students who have been my students for like 15 years, 16 years, and they've become very good, great friends, almost sisters, you know. And the way my sister and I look at it is we teach them because they become our allies. They become our you know, they fight alongside us when you know, things happen with Navajo weaving. They're there in the front line saying, this is wrong, you shouldn't be doing this. And there's a lot of reasons. That's one of the main reasons why we teach non-Native people, because we have to have allies on our side to help us fight this. You know, people don't listen to us because the color of our skin, because of who we are, whatever. But if you have allies standing behind you who don't look like you, fighting with you, people are going to realize that, oh, okay, well, why is this happening? You know, and just within the last 5 years, our tribal government finally took a stance and put a stop to urban outfitters using our designs, and made them, you know, do away with all the I guess like they did underwears and all kinds of stuff with our Navajo designs, and made them stop. And then they put a stop to Ralph Lauren copying, you know, our Navajo dresses. And, you know, things like that. So I think our tribe is hopefully waking up to understanding that, and they've copyrighted the word Navajo, so that, that helps us a lot when it comes to copyrights and stuff like that. But, to me, anybody who's interested in Navajo weaving, I'm more than willing to teach, because I feel like everybody should know what it's like. I just don't want you to put out a shingle saying you're selling Navajo weaving, because that's not why I'm doing that.
Yeah, I really appreciate you saying that. And I also think that part of what I want to say, or what I meant to say, is that generosity in teaching techniques is really also encouraging your students, in particular, like the non-native students, to create designs perhaps that mean something to them, that relate to their lives, rather than taking from designs that belong to you and your family, and the songs that don't get taught. So that, I think, is a really important aspect.
Right, they do, and they'll bring me a design saying, I want to weave this. Like one of my weaving students who's been with me for 12 years, she wanted to do a snake. And I'm like, oh, I don't know, snakes is not part of, Navajo. Well, it has a bad meaning for Navajo people. But anyways, but then I thought, well, she's not Navajo. I can design that snake for her. I'm not weaving it. She's weaving it. And she made a really beautiful piece, And so I tell them that I'm going to teach you just the basics, how to hook your colors, how to unhook your colors, back and forth, but the design's all yours. It has nothing to do with Navajo weaving, So they'll design like cactus, and they'll design, like one of my weaving students is doing a horny toad, and, and then they bring me the pictures, and I'll graph it out for them on a graph paper, and then they go to town working on it. And so it's not just all about teaching them Navajo weaving, it's just more like teaching them to weave whatever they want. Yeah.
I want to touch on kind of these larger systemic issues that we're up against, and how Indigenous fashion might not just fit within the fashion system itself that is, based on novelty and newness, and constantly seeking what's next, and scouring the world looking for those motifs, looking for those next trends, because of the pace of fashion itself. Natalie, any thoughts on how it doesn't jive, or maybe what allyship is?
That that touches on this fall. I tuned into some of the museum at FIT talks, and there was one with Karina Emmerich and artist Jeffrey Gibson that talked about exactly this, and the way in which the pandemic has people are sort of hopeful at the possibility of it slowing down this pace of consumption, and the consumption that I think many of us are a product of a system that accelerates our desire for newness, like the induced obsolescence of the last 100 years, and it's a question. I mean, I don't have an answer, obviously. I just think a lot about whether the Indigenous clothing and practices that are closer to the tenets of ethical consumption and sustainability are in any way compatible with, and then Barbara touched on this, about the sort of sticker shock that many people experience at a true, and I don't want to even call it a product, at a true creation, because we are so artificially conditioned to lower prices and to a lack of understanding about what goes into what is made. Whether the price is high or whether the price is low, there's a cost along the supply chain, and I really question whether it should be, and maybe we should simply be dismantling that system that we are a part of. That is the dominant system, I suppose.
Mila, did you want to touch on one thing I've been wondering or thinking about is just how political sometimes our creations can be, and how, do you think about how, I guess just political high tanning is, or why is high tanning so important for us as Indigenous people?
For myself, when I started to learn the process of high tanning, it was really an act of resistance and like physically occupying my traditional territory. Like, you're on the land, you're using the land, you have to go and find the things that you need to do the process on the land. And so you're using the land. And so the idea is like, if you use the land, they can't take it for resources because you're using it. So at like asserting my Indigenous rights, asserting my my inherent rights, revitalizing our traditional teachings in our community that just we've had policies and stuff to like just separate us from our land for over 100 years. And so it's really like reconnecting with our land and with new high tenors and younger people. It's really like it's a tangible decolonial process that you could feel. Like you're not just reading it in books or listening to a lecture or something. You're physically just you're just embodying your Indigenous, your history, your culture, and you're just creating that muscle memory. And then you're also like revitalizing your blood memory, like things, you just feel good and you feel strong and capable. And so I really love really like how badass high tanners are when they start tanning, because like you can see like their confidence and their love for their culture and the land. It's just I love it so much. And for myself, high tanning is like, it's so many things, but it's also like for us up north, because we're so far north, it was our clothes, our transportation, our homes. And so it's really like the basis of my society, my civilization. Like up here, it's a Dene person. And it's also just like the canvas of our art. It's like it's a foundational art form for Indigenous people, because like we've beaded on it, we've painted on it, like we make our moccasins out of it. Like it's like our identity and our nations, like of our nations, like everybody has different styles of moccasins. Everybody like has different beading styles or quill work and different styles of how we made our clothes, but that was all made with leather and hide. So pretty like foundational in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
The material of life itself, perhaps. Wow.
Sheep is
Barbara,
life.
are you seeing similarities?
Yeah, totally. You know, like in Navajo way, we say sheep is life. Yeah, we use everything from the sheep, from the hide to sleep on, to sit on, you know, and use as clothing, as dressing. We eat every part of the sheep, and we use the wool from it to create beautiful weavings. And so that for us is and that's why we call it sheep is life. Yeah. And basically everything from the earth, you know, you use everything from the earth, you know, and then by the end of your life, you give everything back.
And so maybe let's return to my original prompt to close us, which is how would you help guide this burgeoning Indigenous fashion movement? Are there pieces of advice, or do you see components of your careers where you're helping to guide this movement? What would you say to the future that we want to see? And maybe Karen or Natalie, if you want to jump in first.
Go ahead, Karen.
Okay. Well, one of the things, like as a museum person and as the director of our Native American Fellowship Program at the Peabody Essex Museum, it's imperative that we make space for Indigenous makers. We need to have Indigenous contemporary art in our collections. But beyond that, like in addition to having exhibitions and programs and publications, we need to be training the next generation of Indigenous writers and makers and curators and educators and designers and graphic designers. And so I think that we need to be hitting, I know we're here to kind of talk about Indigenous fashion, but we need to be hitting it from all the sides and like lifting up and moving it along. So that is one thing that I feel really committed to, and I feel really strongly that it's an imperative for me, but also for all of the people who call themselves allies and accomplices and people who are working in museums in particular, we need to be fostering the next generation and making space. So.
Natalie, any final thoughts?
Oh, I mean, what both Mila and Barbara are talking about, it's lean into that. Like, honestly, it's about changing sort of the minds of like making people understand that that is actually the better and original way. Like, it's a conversation that one hopes that, people understand more in a general way. Like, I mean, the idea of, leaning into, I mean, that the fashion system is incompatible and that it is not flawed, it is evil and exploitative but using it in fashion journalism, and I know that's a different panel, but using fashion journalism to your own ends whenever possible, and the financial sections and the sustainability, like all of those different verticals to your advantage in having that message amplified. I mean, it's really slow work, but I feel like there is an opportunity right now as people take stock a little bit and appreciate every part of their lives that is superfluous to be a piece of the light that gets into that crack. I think I'm, cautiously optimistic about possibility in a general way. Yeah.
Right. So yeah, a return to slowness and to that appreciation, I think, and hopefully, yeah, maybe the pandemic is causing a bit more reflection on our fashion choices. Barbara, any final words before we wrap up? Oh, I wish I could just spend the whole day with you,
Teach me, Barbara.
Yeah, I will put you guys to work. No, I just, one thing about Navajo weavers was for a long, long time, we were pigeonholed into the region where we came from. My family comes from Tigre Hill, New Mexico, and we were Tigre Hill weavers. We were nothing else but Tigre Hill weavers. Even if we chose to weave other styles, we would have had a problem selling them, so nowadays, 30, 40 years later, weavers can do whatever they want. They can create any kind of patterns they want, any kind of style they want. Doesn't really matter because trading posts are not ruling the weavers' lives anymore. And so we have a lot of male weavers now. We have a lot of young weavers who are going back to the old way. They're learning how to respin their wool. They're learning how to even starting to have flocks of sheep and and doing their trading with wool and stuff. And they're creating different styles of weaving, and they're going into fashion. So they're using some of their weaving as mantas or as dresses or as ponchos or whatever. And then you'll see a lot of them at Santa Fe Indian Market during the fashion, Sunday morning fashion, or at the Hurt Museum, which is Friday night fashion. And you'll see a lot of their creations and stuff. So a lot of the indigenous people are just running away with the fashion part, and it's really, really amazing to see. I mean, I think fashion started at Santa Fe Indian Market about 30 years ago, and it was all just traditional, it's just traditional weaving or traditional outfits and stuff. That was the fashion. Nowadays, you have Orlando coming up with these huge gown flows with beads everywhere, and it's just amazing how far we've come in the fashion world. But the basic of that is knowledge, where you come from, what your materials are, all that comes into play. The techniques, everything you learn as a weaver, as a beater, as a silversmith, whatever, that all comes into play to create this fashion, and it still holds true. And I was always told when I was young that you never cut corners. You're only as good as your last piece. People are only going to see your last piece, and that's what they're going to know you as. So you always have to put your best piece forward and let people see what you do.
Miigwech. Amelia, add to that? Can you top that?
what do I want to see in Indigenous fashion going forward? I'm really loving just all of the earrings everybody's creating. I'm loving all of the stuff on social media. I have like a continuously growing collection of earrings.
I forgot mine. I have them and I have a bunch, but yeah. Like envy, earring envy happening. So
And I just want to continue seeing also all of the high tanners doing the work that they're doing in their communities. Like my dream when I started teaching was that there would be like high tanners like in all the different regions, and just more high tanners like coming up, and being able to see what they're doing with hides and the beadwork that they're doing. And there's a whole lot of tufting happening. So there's all of these materials, like our traditional materials, are coming up in our contemporary accessories and stuff like that. So I'm just super excited about seeing more and more of that. I love when I wear my hide earrings and I travel south to somewhere like humid, like it just like brings out the smell more, whereas it's pretty dry up here. But when I'm wearing my stuff down south, I know people smell me. So I think that's also kind of like you're indigenizing spaces like through your senses in other ways.
Right, miigwech. So as you can probably tell, Indigenous materiality is huge. There are worlds of knowledge, worlds of culture in the colors, in the materials, in the symbols. And maybe it's okay if you don't know everything about it, but if you slowly just start to come to better places of understanding, and in a perfect world, building relationships with those Indigenous makers, I think that's a good place to start. So Chimigwech, everyone, for joining us. Thank you so much for your words. It was so nice sitting down with you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
See you. Thank you.
Yeah, Isa, thank you very much.